All right, happy Friday to everybody. Week 8. We're almost halfway through the season. This is the Sumer Sports Show. This is the Friday edition. I'm here on Friday, so I'm going to do the show. Remember, Mondays, Wednesdays, it's myself. It's Thomas Dimitroff, the CEO of Sumer, the former general manager of the Atlanta Falcons. We generally speaking do broader topics during those days. Whereas today on Friday, I generally will take listener questions, listener comments, and I'm going to try my best to go through every game in a way that is, different than most people here. Difficult calls me. That's a Frazier, an upgrade over the Seth Rogen that I normally get. Frazier Lamont says hello there. He said hello to Frazier. I'm an idiot, but we already knew that. Okay. Awesome. We're at week 8. Last night we had a little bit of a scare. If you're a Buffalo Bills fan or somebody like me who is a little bit invested in Buffalo being good. In week 1 in the Sumer Sports weekly article, I said I'm buying into Buffalo. Last night, because pregame Josh Allen was 15-1 to be the MVP and actually had longer odds than Brock Purdy. I think Josh Allen's an MVP candidate. I think that this is something where this is a long season. The MVP generally is given out to the quarterback who is at least among the leaders in EPA per play, if not the leader. And with Patrick Mahomes, Patrick Mahomes is rightfully the favorite. Now, let's not get this twisted, but with Patrick Mahomes not kind of separating his offense in terms of statistics away from everybody, there is an opportunity for somebody like Josh Allen to come in. I think the prices on Lamar, I think the prices on even like Brock Purdy, Tua Tagovailoa are a little bit weird. Not weird, but a little too. It's not worth it right now. I think Josh Allen's the only one worth it on the market. Beat Gamer 99 says Bills are kind of scary in my opinion. They seem fine, but there are signs that could be bad. I agree. I think this is something where this is a team that has thoroughly outplayed teams at times, including last night. They outgained Tampa Bay by over 100 and I believe it was 150, 160 yards. Yards per play advantage was like 1.3 yards per play. At the same time, they couldn't close the door, and they couldn't, this is after struggling against New England, struggling against New York, and obviously struggling against Jacksonville. It is concerning. But in the history of the NFL, there are teams that end up winning the Super Bowl, end up being great football teams that go through stretches like this. For Kansas City fan like me, 2021, that team had 2 months of play where they weren't particularly great. Even in this, times last year, they struggled with Denver both games. They went to overtime with Houston, and ultimately were still Super Bowl champions. So it is concerning, but I do think that Buffalo has some of the goods, even with some of the injuries on the defensive side, to be a solid football team. And I think quarterback-wise, are still working with one of the best players at the position in the league. Good question here from Michael. Eric Helian. Eric, do you have reasons why scoring is down so much across the league this year compared to others? Is just noise or signal? I don't think it's noise. I do think it's fundamental to a few things. So the first thing I think about when I think about scoring in the NFL is a design that's been happening for a long time. Apologies for this, because generally speaking, a lot of my opinions about the NFL come about through my opinions of watching the Chiefs. But 2 years ago, teams started running a lot of too high stuff against Kansas City. They had a game, they had games where, they scored 3 points against the Titans, 19 points against the Dallas Cowboys, 13 points against Jordan Love and the Packers. There was a period of time where, unless they were playing a Gus Bradley defense, they weren't able to move the football particularly well. And they got around it. They ended up, hosting the conference title game yet again. They moved through it. They led the league in points per drive that year, but they had the fewest number of drives in football. And I think, when your quarterback is Patrick Mahomes, the when the quarterback's Patrick Mahomes, like you can do that, right? And Patrick does this really interesting thing, which is why DeAndre Hopkins, for example, isn't on the team and stuff, where Patrick doesn't settle for like 50-50 passes. He moves around, he kind of avoids things until he gets a pass that is like pretty high expected completion percentage. And that's also one of the reasons why he's not as good in CPOE as a lot of quarterbacks, is like he engineers throws where the fail rate is small. And a lot of NFL teams nowadays just simply don't have the quarterback for which that is true. So when you look at things, and I've written about this at Sumer a couple times, when you look at things like drive success, when you look at things like play for play success, it's down, but it's not nearly as down as EPA per play. And some of that is turnovers and some of that is quarterback play. Is just like, we have Desmond Ridder starting in the NFL, we have Sam Howell starting in the NFL. Some of that is sack related, like we have seen just, a lot of young quarterbacks struggle in the pocket, but a decent amount of it is structural, meaning like the NFL teams are more than happy now with being bad at surrendering 5-yard plays. But in terms of 50-yard plays, they're much, much better at it. And you take a look at Vegas, like that's not a good defense, but that's a defense that generally speaking, like keeps other teams from scoring 30 points because they're more than happy to lower the number of drives and force, guys like Baker Mayfield to make mistakes, and guys like, the Sam Howells and Desmond Ridder. And you couple that with the fact that like this era of low ADOT, hyper efficient passing from a personnel standpoint is over. Phillip Rivers retired, Big Ben retired, Tom Brady retired, Aaron Rodgers is all but retired. Kirk Cousins is older, and he brought back a game from the past the other night. Like the talent level at the position is also gone. And we always assumed, the 2020 draft brought some good talent. The 2021 draft was supposed to, really hasn't, other than Lawrence. 2020, and so I think it's also just a lack of talent at the quarterback position. And, now we're 12 years into the new collective bargaining agreement. Quarterbacks who started the Super Bowl in the early 2000s, right? You're talking about like Kurt Warner, Jake Delhomme, Brad Johnson, Rich Gannon, are all lower draft picks, guys who sat the bench for a long time. And because of the way the CBA is, there isn't actually an incentive for teams to develop quarterbacks. And so when you have a crop of quarterbacks just all retire, there isn't like the next guy waiting in the wings with that kind of experience in the system. And like Jordan Love being like a notable counterexample. But for the most part, there aren't guys waiting in the wings the way that there were decades ago. Going through some comments here. This one's Coleman here. LOL, the Chiefs are a good prior for many things. They're probably not. I mean, like, honestly, you can't take much, get Patrick Mahomes is not a solution for 31 teams. Would you hear your thoughts on everyone saying Chiefs need to get a wide receiver? Do you think they will? I'm not trying to root for my prediction here. So, I do think that there's an opportunity now with Ross, going on the commissioner exempt list. Richie James is gone. They brought Hardman in. I think Hardman provides some things that are different, meaning I think he'll help the run game because he's the only guy really on the jet sweeps that anybody respects. I think he'll carry the ball on those a decent amount as well. But he's not a deep threat. He doesn't track the ball well as a deep threat. They do get Justin Watson back this week, but honestly, Valdes-Scantling, has had 2 pretty good games in the last 6 months. They were both, Watson was sick during the conference title game against the Bengals, and he had 100 yards and a touchdown. Last week, he had about 100 yards and a touchdown with Watson out. It's weird. To bring a player into the Chiefs fold at wide receiver right now, other than Hardman, would have to disrupt something that I think that they're trying to do, which is lean into the free agent signing last year that was Valdes-Scantling and develop Sky Moore and Rashee Rice. And I think if you bring somebody in there that, especially that second category, it curbs the development, I think, of Rashee Rice, who I think that the people in the building really believe is going to be a great player. So I don't think that they should pick up somebody. I think that they're good enough. I think this is the deepest and best Chiefs roster we've seen in the Mahomes era. And I think that, you live with the good and the bad. And the bad, of course, is wide receiver and running back depth for that team. Okay, looking at some. Michael says, "Thanks for explaining. I really love the shows, especially these on Fridays. You're crushing. We'll appreciate you. This really does. This really does help. Move the show along when there are great questions." Michael has another question. Trade deadline is next Tuesday. Any moves you could see getting done? Chase Young, Montez Sweat. What would be the asking price on pass rushers? That's a great. Brian Burns is another one. I think Sweat is more likely to get traded from what I'm hearing. I think that there are suitors for Sweat. I also think that because Washington is kind of in a lame duck, situation where, they just hired a senior VP of analytics. It's not clear that, what's going to happen to Rivera, Martin Mayhew, Bieniemy. I think that there's simultaneously more of a chance that Sweat goes and they buy into Chase Young, because remember, the 5th-year option decision by Young was made by pre-Josh Harris ownership decision makers. I think that there's a chance that the 2nd overall pick from 2020 stays around. As far as what it costs, I think for a guy of Sweat's caliber, you're probably talking a 2nd-round pick, especially because it's still not as expensive on the salary side. I think for Chase Young, you're probably thinking a little higher, which is probably why Sweat will be the one to go, and no one's going to really want Chase Young for that price. So that's how I see it. I think Brian Burns has also a chance of being dealt. I know he might not play this weekend, which puts a lot of stress on that Panthers defense. Burns is also not as highly regarded in the league as some of the other players. He's more, in the eyes of the league, he's more of a Yannick Ngakoue than he is, let's say, let's think of a higher end, obviously the Bosa's and guys like that, but he's just more thought of in that 2nd tier, that kind of one-trick pony group. And as we've seen with Ngakoue, those guys can make a pretty penny, but they don't get the 5 years, $125 million deals that the true kind of Bosa type defensive ends, the Watts, the Garretts, those guys end up getting, and that I think is rightfully so. This is interesting. Would love for the Ravens to get Derrick Henry. Imagine Henry with Lamar's gravity in the run game. Absolutely. I like Gus Edwards. He's always kind of my running backs don't matter favorite running back, but the only thing I worry about is that the Ravens have been not. And some of it is, I think, anecdotal, but I think some of it is also, when you look at the actual, slugging percentage of the players they lose, injuries have always been an issue with the Ravens. And I don't know if I take on a player who has had injuries in the past, like Henry, whose style of play is more conducive to injuries. But it could be, for a half a season, I think anything's worth a shot, especially because I think this Ravens team, it depends upon the day, but I think other than Kansas City, the Ravens can go up against anybody in the NFL right now. This is interesting by Rhett. Dallas needs Derrick Henry. Pollard is in the workhorse, and Dak needs the real threat of the run game. I think Zeke, that was an underrated part of Zeke. When you looked at the tracking data, people really did respect Zeke in the run game, even though his time as an efficient running back had long since passed. So that's again, those are very good questions. Let's weave through some of the games here. I'm looking at Pinnacle Sports because I like their interface more than anybody. Let's talk briefly about the Vikings against the Packers. This is a cool rivalry game, and it's funny. It's also, I looked ahead at next week's lines. This NFL season, I think, will set a record for the number of point spreads below two, but below 3, right? This game, the Vikings are favored by 1, -118 on the money line per Pinnacle. This is about right from where I see it as far as my numbers. Kirk Cousins, it's going to be off a short rest. It's going to be in Lambeau, but Cousins has won, he's won starts in Lambeau before. He's also tied starts in Lambeau before. And I think the Vikings have figured some things out defensively. I think they don't nearly have as much talent as they had last year, losing Zadarius Smith, losing Patrick Peterson, replacing Chandon Sullivan with a guy who's more of a safety in Josh Metellus. Eric Kendricks is gone. Marcus Davenport has missed time. He missed last week. But Brian Flores has them playing very aggressively. And I think for young quarterbacks who don't quite have a grasp on the game, I think that that's an edge for them. Last year, that team gave up a lot of yards, and to guys like Teddy Bridgewater and guys like Mike White, and this year, kudos to Flores. Other than like Baker Mayfield, I think that they've given up some stuff to good quarterbacks, and they've mostly suffocated the bad quarterbacks, the Justin Fieldses, the Bryce Youngs of the world. And I think that there's a chance that they do that today. I think if you're looking at this and you're going into the year, I'll throw my hand up. I was positive about Green Bay. I'm a little worried about this game. So Beat Gamer's incredibly right here. Flores loves cover zero. Difficult says Vikings got pretty lucky. CMC fumbled and Purdy got concussed and threw 2 picks. Yeah, I think so. 100%. I mean, I think if you run that game back, the Niners win. I don't know if they cover the number, but they certainly win that game more often than not. But at the same time, and there's also a point here that I don't want to gloss over. I thought Kirk Cousins played wonderfully on Monday for him. But make no mistake, they scored 6 second-half points. And this has been a team that has been a team whose offensive production has not been commensurate with the quarterback salary for an awful long time. And so, again, I can't, if I was betting this game, I couldn't get to that. I couldn't get to laying that with Minnesota, but I also am worried about Green Bay. I'm just going to spend a little bit of time. The Atlanta Falcons here in the city of Buckhead, are laying 2.5 in Tennessee. That is with, Will Levis starting. Will Levis of urban redneck fame, the guy who was in all of our DMs telling us he'd bet us $1 million that Will Levis would be drafted first overall, not first in the second round, but first overall, and then abruptly quit Twitter after that. I don't like Will Levis. I think that there's some, there's obvious, to me, there's Drew Lock vibes there, which I think, if you want a strong arm backup in a league where they put some stock in developing quarterbacks, I think he could have a chance. I just think that you combine the fact that Rand Carthon just started with Tennessee, Mike Vrabel is entrenched there, but certainly isn't going to want to lose, season after season after season. I just don't know how much of Will Levis you're going to get. And I think in this particular spot, the offensive line problems for the Titans, the relative stoutness of the Falcons defense, this makes it hard for me to take the points with the Titans. I'm laying points on the road with Ridder is never an option either. So I think, again, this is one where I wait and see on this one. I don't really have a strong opinion other than what I just said. This one's interesting. New England goes to Miami. Look aheads were above double digits in this one, but right now you have kind of a juiced 9.5, not even that juiced, -109 on Pinnacle for the Dolphins. This is, obviously the Dolphins now are just a half game up on the Bills. This is kind of a must-win game in a lot of ways, just because I think the Dolphins want to show that they can compete with teams that have, realistic line of scrimmage players. Now, I don't know if New England kind of qualifies for that. Yushi's been a good pass rusher. They don't have Judon. So maybe Miami catches a break here. They were able to score the 24 points in week 2. Again, this one, I probably would make it a little higher than 9.5. But the people betting the Patriots are certainly doing so because of Belichick, and there's certainly reasons I think that you can believe that Belichick is going to shut down the Dolphins. As our friend Difficult in the chat has said, there are some viability questions about the Dolphins defense, and usually, 2 weeks ago, I would have said, well, what are the Patriots going to do about that? But the Patriots, did do a pretty good job of moving the football against Buffalo the last week, and especially in crunch time. So I'm not a huge opinion here, but I do kind of like the Dolphins. I think that I'm always going to pause though. I'm always going to pause though when trying to get in front of the Patriots bus here. Cluster injuries for the O-line for Miami. Well, and that showed up big time. That showed up big time on Sunday. The Eagles, I mean, line of scrimmage play is kind of their edge, and they really did take it to Tua. Now, also Tyreek's injury. I know he said he's going to play, but knowing from his time in Kansas City, like it might be one of those games where he plays 25 snaps and he's impactful in those snaps, but he can't be reliable the whole game. He's been mostly healthy in Miami, which has been awesome. It's been fun to see him have that kind of success, but there have been plenty of times when he wasn't able to go the whole time. Steven, I will talk to you about the Burrow thing as soon as we get to that game. Eagles laying 6.5, juiced 7 in a lot of places against the Commanders. Last week, I got a lot of shit on Twitter because I said on a few I said on a few shows that I thought that Sam Howell was a backup quarterback in the NFL. I'm just going to say this, like, the sack to pressure rate is not always stable. But when you look at Howell, like you're talking about his final year at UNC, he was 5th in college football in terms of turning pressures into sacks. This year, he's 1st. It is a trait. And this is also a statistical sort of a lesson I'm going to give a lot of people here. Not that our listeners who are very smart need it, but the guys that go on and look at the sacks and they go through the sacks and say, is this Sam Howell's fault, are looking at the problem incredibly wrongly. Part of being a quarterback is being able to avoid bad plays when they're not your fault. And the great quarterbacks, the Marinos, Dan Marino led the NFL in sack percentage the first 7 years of his career and 10 times overall. He went 19 straight games without giving up a sack. So just looking at the plays where a player gets sacked and then reverse engineering and looking at who caused it is the wrong thing, because there are plenty of other pressures. And in the case of Howell, it's 65% of plays of that he's pressured where he's able to not have a sack. For the Patrick Mahomes of the world, it's 85% of those plays, give or take. You need to be looking at those plays too. And that is, and I know people give PFF a lot of crap, and obviously ESPN has had, in my opinion, in some ways a little bit, well, not in some ways, the way in which they marketed the wide receiver metrics, they deserve some scorn. When you look at offensive and defensive line metrics, that's why you have to look at every single play, because you have to know like how many plays were supposed to be sacks that weren't because the quarterback was a maestro back there. How many plays that weren't supposed to be sacks were supposed to be sacks. You have to look at that entire matrix of plays, or else you are going to get a bad view. And I'm not here to say that the offensive line for Washington is great. I don't believe the PFF grade there necessarily. I'm not even here to say that Sam Howell is a dunce and doesn't know how to, deal with pressure. What I'm saying is very, very consistently, he has turned pressure into sacks at rates that surpass most of the other quarterbacks who are his peers. And historically speaking, that ratio is stable from year to year. And so, again, I don't mean to be a dick, but if you're going to say, okay, he's only started 7 games, give him a chance. I'm saying he's a 5th round pick who has very bad metrics predictively. I'm not going to allow 7 games where he's looked okay at times, but not great, and has not been productive. I'm not going to let 7 games push me off of a prior that a 5th round pick is not going to be a starter in the NFL. That's kind of where I'm at. If he comes in and he looks like Justin Herbert for 7 games, I might move off my prior. I might, but again, the Washington people are asking you to essentially get like clean slate him and then evaluate these 7 games, which is the wrong approach. And even then they're looking at the wrong piece of data. So all this is to say, like, I make this game a little bit, I said all this shit about Howell. I make this game closer to like 6 than I do 7. So take that for what it's worth. I do think Washington has some things that are strong about them. I think Kendall Fuller has been a great secondary player. However, they do run a lot of man coverage, and the Eagles do, especially A.J. Brown, kind of destroys man coverage. He's only the second receiver in the history of the league to have 125 yards in 5 consecutive games. So I wouldn't necessarily even be looking at this game per side of total. I'd look at it from a player props and A.J. Brown perspective. Jalen Hurts doesn't look good, though, and I think that at some point that's going to affect the Eagles in a negative way. So there's that. Dallas laying 6.5 at home against the Rams. Rams coming off of a voodoo effort by Mike Tomlin. Again, in this case, his voodoo magic was over the referees and caused a very bad call at the end of the game that downed the Rams. I make this game closer to 7 or 8. I think Dallas off of a bye will get things together. I think Mike McCarthy Mike McCarthy's a weird one. As people probably know, I was one of the people that met with McCarthy during his analytics voyage, and so I have a little bit of a soft spot for him. I think he is curious. I do think he's good at evolving. I do think he's not as big of a boob as a lot of people put him out to be, but there is something missing with this Dallas team. And I'm hoping that over the bye, they figure a little bit of that out, because I have so far been unimpressed with the way they've used CeeDee Lamb and Tony Pollard and Brandon Cooks, frankly. And I think that they need to improve to hit on a season where you look at the rest of the NFC, they probably could, if they improve by a couple points here and there, I think that they could end up being the best team in the NFC. But for whatever reason, something's missing, and so hopefully they regain that. I'm hoping that they do against the Rams here. Nothing against the Rams. I just think that this is a team where you're starting to see some of the difficulties that can arise when you are a kind of a stars and scrubs team, and the scrubs have been predominantly 4th-round picks or later for as long as you can remember. And again, I think McVay is coaching his way out of a paper bag incredibly well this year, but there's only so much he can do. This one, Houston laying 3, juiced -124 against the Panthers. I know I did some shows this week where I made a case for the Panthers. Everything that has come out since has been bad, which is injuries to the defense. Thomas Brown is going to get his opportunity, speaking of McVay, to call plays, which I do think will benefit Bryce Young coming off of a bye. Houston is also coming off of a bye, and so far this season have been more impressive, more encouraging than well, we get some affirmation here for the Texans from Difficult. I think that Houston has a lot of encouraging elements to it. I think that their wide receivers have been a lot better than I thought. I think the defense is holding up despite injuries, especially to the secondary. And their offensive line is getting healthier after a first few weeks where C.J. Stroud was dealing with a lack of health up there. I think that things are coming together well. So if you can get 3.5, I think maybe. But my opinion has weakened as the week has progressed due to injuries, but also I am buying in on C.J. Stroud. I think that he is a very good talent there. New Orleans laying 1 in Indianapolis. They were 1.5-point dogs. Now the move through 0 isn't much. But I don't know if I'll watch a second of this game that's not on Red Zone. If the world was rational, I think the Saints would be a bigger favorite in this game. But when you look at some of the modeling, and I try to be positive about people on here, but when you do modeling for coaching and play callers, this is 100% it with Sean here. Believe in Steichen. Steichen is Steichen's a very good coach already. That is very apparent. And I don't think they should have lost that game to Cleveland. I think that they had a number of poor breaks that went their way. yeah, that to me is, I think, one of the other side of it. The first side of it, though, is that Dennis Allen so far has struggled as the coach of the Saints. I mean, when you look at, any way you want to model it, whether it be how they do against the point spread, or how they do against the point spread versus expectations. So taking in roster considerations, like, there's not a metric that I can build that shines positively on either Derek Carr or Dennis Allen so far. And so this is a game where, if you look, just graded out the talent, the Saints should win this football game. But I hesitate, and hence I don't have a big opinion on this one, because I just can't trust the coaching differential. And I know I'm praising Steichen a lot for somebody who's only been a head coach for 7 games or so, but I think it's warranted. And in the case of Dennis Allen, I think we have a big sample. So moving on, the Jaguars laying 2, -100 actually. And the Steelers getting to -110. This has been one there's been some movement. Earlier in the week, the Jags were more like a cheap 3, and the Steelers, so they were getting money on the road against the Steelers, coming off kind of another Mickey Mouse win against a team that makes mistakes. But there is always a reason why the Steelers team ends up being closer than they're supposed to be, and there's a chance that this could rear its ugly head this week. The Jaguars healthier on the offensive line than they started the season. Or Cam Robinson came off of the gambling suspension, but the mismatch between Highsmith and Watt and those two tackles, the rookie Anton Harrison and Cam and the left tackle Cam Robinson, I think, is still substantial. And Lawrence, I know they're getting the time off, and I know Doug Peterson's a good coach and will scheme around it, but he may or may not be able to avoid some of these things. I do like Jacksonville this one. I make it closer to 3.5. But anytime you kind of look at, anytime you're different that much from the where the market's laying it out, it's good to sort of ask why. This has been an interesting one. Ikshesh Bekele says Watt hasn't been good. Watt has always had the statistical profile of a guy who doesn't win that much, a guy that doesn't put up as much pressure as the sacks. He's one where there's enough big plays that he makes, and they also play him somewhat like and I don't mean this disrespectfully to Lawrence Taylor, but they play him as an edge in the old Belichick Giants defenses, where he's asked to do more than just rush the passer. So I think some of his statistics, I don't think he's as good as Myles Garrett. I'm just throw that out there. I know Steelers fans get mad when you say that, but I also don't think like he hasn't been good because of the pressure statistics. I do think he's asked to do he's asked to do some things that are different. But he still puts up great sack numbers and all that kind of stuff. But we have seen guys, Jared Allen being one of them, who statistically always had a higher pressure to sack ratio. And I think for some players, it doesn't necessarily regress as much. Moving on. This one's interesting. Cleveland getting 3.5 on the road against Seattle. This was closer to 3 when the markets opened. Geno Smith, that was, I said this on the show last week, the Seahawks laying the points was my favorite bet of last week. They won and covered. Part of me thinks that was, lucky in that, like, they had to get a missed punt against, they had to kick a long field goal at the end just to cover, they had to get sacked, but they kind of dominated that game. And, for a few weeks in a row, they've really struggled in the red zone. Not having Metcalf, I think, hurts them a little bit. Geno is just kind of Geno's a good quarterback, but I don't think he's a great quarterback. So there are some kind of like conflicting things that I think have made it so that I don't think that their red zone woes are complete noise, even though I think that they're obviously more noise than the in between the 20s efficiency that they've had has given rise to. They also run the ball far too often to Kenneth Walker on early downs, and that kind of trips me out a little bit. On the other hand, the Cleveland Browns, this is interesting, gave up a lot of points last week, but have mostly been terrific. And in fact, last week, even though they did give up a lot of points, they were one of the sole reasons why this team even scored some of the points that they scored, Myles Garrett specifically. Seattle, banged up along the offensive line. So I think Myles Garrett's going to have some fun there. And I think in some ways, Philip Walker's been terrible. Make no mistake. EPA per play has been awful. There have been a number of plays you're just like, how is that an NFL quarterback? People forget he was beaten out by Tyson Bagent, a Division II quarterback with Chicago, and they cut him and let him keep guaranteed money as a result. That's how bad he was. So there are some things to not like about Philip Walker. That being said, I think Stefanski, in a weird way, is more comfortable with a quarterback that has such great deficiencies. And Frazier says this here. He goes, right now, Walker isn't a great downgrade from Watson. I think the issue is he is a downgrade from Watson. The problem is that Watson is so variable right now that I think against teams that are below the upper echelon of the NFL. So think Ravens, Chiefs, Bills, Eagles, Niners, maybe Detroit. Probably not Detroit. I think that that's where Watson offers value to this Browns team, where if he's healthy and he hits on what he used to be, he can beat those teams with this Browns roster. I think if you're the Browns and you haven't made the playoffs since 2020, and your defense is right now running as good as any defense in the history of the NFL has, you need a quarterback just to kind of get you on the green. And especially if this Seattle team is going to struggle in the red zone, I do think Walker gives them a chance to win. So, yeah. And difficult brings this up, and we talked about it. Watson can't really throw a football right now. So I think that, yeah, that's a big thing. I mean, and so in some ways, this is kind of the perfect storm where you can get Walker in there. Their schedule isn't horrible, so he can kind of go, let's say he wins 3 out of every 5 games because of that defense for the next 2 months, and Watson comes back and is actually healthy, then they're working with it. If they kind of have to do this on again, off again thing with Watson in the shoulder, Watson has this like professional arrogance that has bled into many parts of his life, then they're going to be stuck because he's going to throw the interceptions. He's not going to play within the confines of the offense, and you're going to ruin a great defense. So all this is to say, I think the Browns are doing the right thing, and they don't really have another choice anyway. But I think that this is still a winnable solution for them for the next couple months with Walker. Unfortunately, for our eyes, we'll have to watch that. Chiefs. It depends upon where you look. Laying 8 on Pinnacle plus 115. It's 7 other places. Against the Broncos. They haven't lost to the Broncos since week 2 of 2015. That was my second week working at the PFF mothership. So that's been forever. Broncos are not exactly tanking, but they're not exactly trying either. Frank Clark, Randy Gregory. I think Justin Simmons is a guy that's going to get a look. Chiefs have mostly struggled to cover the number against the Broncos last year, 0-2 against the number last year. This year they did cover, but it was a 19-point effort against a team that was really struggling to stop teams. So I think that this, any sort of notion that they're going to overlook this game and get to Germany the following week, I don't really buy that. I think that the Chiefs, found a little bit offensively last week. But I think this number is a little bit big for me to really commit to Kansas City. Probably a good teaser leg, even though they're on the road. And the environment in Denver can lead to bigger variance. To me, that's like the place to look, I think. Michael says it right. Mahomes is 15-0 all time against divisional opponents on the road. That's unreal. It is. I mean, he's absolutely an assassin there. Cincinnati at San Francisco. I know we got a question about Burrow. This game was 6 on the look ahead, 6.5 on the look ahead, 5.5, and then we heard about the Purdy news. Kind of now in that got to 3. Now it's kind of back to the 3.5, 4. If the Bengals aren't healthy this week, like I don't know if they're going to get healthy. Like that's like as somebody who's, former athletes dealt with calf injuries before, like it's not something that necessarily gets better as you sort of play through it. So I'm worried about the Bengals. I respect the betting markets greatly. If the betting markets say that they're off of a bye or that big of underdogs against Sam Darnold coming off of a short week, I think that there's real trouble there. I think their defense with Lou Anarumo had gotten a lot of shine the last couple of years and probably hasn't earned it with, Jesse Bates leaving, Von Bell leaving. I don't think they've gotten the same sort of star-studded play from Trey Hendrickson and guys like that they've gotten in the past. So I'm worried about them defensively. And then offensively, Higgins hasn't been that guy this year. The tight end position is almost non-existent. And Joe Mixon, who I don't know if Joe Mixon has ever been good, but Joe Mixon is not good either. And unlike last year where Samaje Perine was a very good complementary back, I don't think they have anybody to go there. So I think the Bengals are in trouble. There's also this whole thing about they're talking like Purdy is going to play. That could certainly be the case. I do want to dispel a notion there. Ikesh said, didn't Schefter say Purdy can't play? Difficult said he lies frequently. I'm going to say this in the nicest ways possible because I've met Schefter. I've had him on the show before. I don't think it's lying. I don't think we can attribute to malice what can frequently be attributed at times to incompetence. I do think that there is an element of, and I know that he is, and maybe that's giving him a break that he doesn't deserve. But I don't think that it's malicious. I think that it's simple incompetence at times. I'll just go with that. And maybe that I don't think he's malicious. I do think it's just I think it's a lot of carrying water. And yes, it's still ridiculous. Absolutely. Okay. Baltimore at Arizona, laying 8.5. Baltimore minus 119. I'm going to continue until the Cardinals start Kyler Murray. And even then, I think that they'll be overvalued. I think we're still overreacting to a pretty plucky first month from the Cardinals. They've lost by 10 points or more in the last 4 games. Josh Dobbs has been, he's been better than expected, but still not very good. And the only thing that I think the Cardinals have going for them in this one is the amount of man coverage the Ravens run and Dobbs' ability to run. Other than that, I think the Ravens outclass the Cardinals in every aspect of this game. And we have seen frequent meltdowns from the Ravens against the Steelers and against the Colts, even to some degree against the Titans a couple weeks ago. But I still think the Ravens, and I think, if you got in early in the week, you are getting that sweet CLV on Baltimore. So that's all I'll say about that one. I think Lamar Jackson is second in MVP voting right now. If I were to give a vote, I think Jackson has been phenomenal, and I think only Mahomes has been better. Sunday Night Football, the Bears getting 8, a cheap 8 against the San Diego Chargers. Against the San Diego Chargers, the Bears getting 8. It feels short, but I don't know when the last time the Chargers reliably did anything. I mean, they lost to the Titans this year. Obviously the Dolphins, but there's no loss of, there's nothing there that I think that you can ding them for. But look, as somebody who's watched a lot of Chiefs and Chargers slugfests, that was the weakest effort that they've had against Kansas City for quite some time. And I think Herbert's missing a lot of throws. I think the offensive line has really not protected him. And, I don't think the coach is doing a ton of favors either, both on offense or defense. So I'm not going to sit here with Ikesh and say the Bears +9 is a lock. But I can't even get to like a Chargers teaser here. I have no faith in the Chargers. And I think the Bears, while again, I don't think the Bears are any good. I think that they exposed the Raiders for kind of who the Raiders are last week. To me, there's just too much variance there. I have no effing clue why this is on Sunday Night Football for one. So that's something that I'm a little bit dumbfounded by, and will certainly need to understand better. Okay, Monday Night Football. This should be okay. Raiders getting 8.5. Detroit hosting Las Vegas. I make this more like 7. And I've been a big Detroit fan, for a couple of years now. I do like what Dan Campbell's doing. I do think that they'll bounce back from this, and I think that in a couple months they'll still be heavy favorites to be that division winner. But I do think that there are some things that are fundamental to what they're trying to do that they're struggling with. I think they struggle in the deep passing game because Jameson Williams, who was 0 for 6 on targets the other day against Baltimore, he's got to figure out how to play NFL wide receiver. He feels like kind of a poor man's Marquez Valdes-Scantling right now, which you never really want to be. I think Gibbs showed me a little bit of spunk on Sunday, but it was probably a little too late. I think David Montgomery does actually help that football team. I don't know if, difficult, you're sort of you're radicalizing me a little bit on the value of running backs. I do think he does a good job of the physicality stuff there for them, and they miss him when he's gone. And then I think defensively, now, not that the Raiders are going to be able to take advantage of it, but defensively, there are holes that I think that we overlooked when they beat Tampa Bay, Atlanta, and teams like that. So I'd love to see Detroit win. I'd love to see them win that division for the first time since 1993, but I'm not exactly rushing to have an opinion on them here. This has been a lot of fun. Before we go, I do want to, if there are any other questions, throw them in the chat. But I also, if you liked what you heard on this podcast, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, go to Apple Podcasts, leave a review. Thomas Dimitrov, my boss, really loves when he gets reviews, positive reviews about about the show. So please go ahead and do that. Please give Sean Syed and Tage Stephan a chance on Tuesday with Stats and Schemes. They are they're great, and they offer perspective that I find enriching sort of every single time I talk to them. They're also doing a great job with our social media accounts. Follow us at Sumer Sports, both on Twitter and on TikTok. Just to clean this up with a few more questions before the podcast is over. Why don't we think about quarterbacks' outcomes from a Bayesian perspective as they develop more often? Feel like we would really help contextualizing outcomes with players like Walter Purdy and Baker. I think we do. From my perspective, all my modeling has kind of some sort of prior involved, right? And that includes where they were drafted, their college statistics, what parts of their college statistics are signal, what parts are noise. For some quarterbacks, you're going to have a bigger composition of noise than signal. So, for example, a guy like Russell Wilson back in the day, a guy that took so many deep dropbacks, a guy that took so much pressure, his data was always going to be wider in terms of its distribution because the stuff that he was doing more often was more unstable. Pressure and longer passes as well as longer developing passes. A guy like Brady was always going to be a little bit less variable because he was always in situations that were more stable year to year. So we do think about it that way. I just think and this is something that, listening to really smart bettors and other analysts has really helped me with. It's like, we do have to really take the amount of information in one game and contextualize it as one game. And I think a lot of times in normal media, we generally speaking overreact too much to what has happened on the field there. Akesh says, well, from Bayesian perspective, Baker sucks. Yeah, I think Baker's been encouraging this year, but there's certainly an element of not living up to that draft position for him. Brandon says Parker's odd man front has been a fun listen as well. Yeah, Parker, I don't know how often he's going to do it, but when he does do that show, he's terrific at it. This has been fun. Hope you guys all have a fun weekend. And like I said, I really enjoy just coming here on Fridays and hanging out. Thank you all for all the questions you have. And have a great weekend. So for Eric Eager, this has been the Sumer Sports Show. Have a good one, everybody.